She was thrown onto the street like a dog because she smelled of rubbish, unaware that her dirty sack carried a fortune capable of buying their entire lives. Music. When they discovered the truth, their regret came too late. Welcome to Soul's Footprints. Today, we bring you a shocking story about the test of poverty. A divine lesson that shows us that blood makes you kin, music, but only loyalty makes you family. Prepare yourselves, because you will witness how greed receives its just punishment. The midday sun in the Yorkshire Dales didn't warm, it punished, beating down on the cracked tarmac of the secondary road, creating water mirages that danced on the horizon like mocking ghosts. It was one of those scorching summer afternoons where the air hangs heavy in your lungs. Music, and even the cicadas seemed to beg for mercy with their monotonous, desperate song. Music. Bethany clenched her hands on the steering wheel of her old '98 Land Rover Defender. The vehicle, a beast of tired metal and peeling paint, trembled and coughed with every mile as if sharing its owner's exhaustion. The air conditioning had died 2 summers ago, just a week after John's funeral. And now, the hot wind blowing through the open windows brought no relief but the salty taste of dust and the acrid smell of burnt heather. "Music, are we nearly there, Mummy?" a small voice asked from the passenger seat. Bethany turned her head for an instant, tearing her gaze from the endless road. Lily, her 6-year-old daughter, hugged Buttons, a one-eyed teddy rabbit that had long lost its original whiteness, to her chest. The girl's cheeks were flushed from the heat, and her hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. "Almost, my darling." "Just a little longer," Bethany lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her dark eyes. The truth was, the trip to Pickering to sell the few boxes of courgettes the dry land had given them hadn't yielded enough. In her apron pocket, Bethany felt the light weight of a few crumpled notes. It wasn't enough. It never was. The mortgage on Hopewell Farm was a noose tightening a little more around her neck each month, suffocating the dreams she and John had sown with such love. "Oh, John, if you could see me now," Bethany thought, feeling that familiar ache in the center of her chest, an emptiness that neither time nor hard work could fill. Since the tractor overturned that morning, leaving her a widow at 28, Bethany had had to harden her heart to survive. But hardness didn't pay the bills, and faith, though immense, didn't stop the bank collectors. Suddenly, something broke the monotony of the desolate landscape. About 200 meters away, a dark figure was silhouetted against the blinding glare of the sun. At first, Bethany thought it was a fallen post, or perhaps a run-over animal. But as the Land Rover advanced, devouring the tarmac, the form came to life. A painful, slow life. It was a woman, or what was left of her. She walked on the gravel verge, hunched over at an almost impossible angle, as if carrying all the sins of the world on her shoulders. She wore black rags, several sizes too big for her skeletal body, and a tattered scarf covered her head, useless against the ferocity of the Yorkshire sun. But what made Bethany's blood run cold, despite the infernal heat, was what the woman was dragging. A huge, dirty Hessian sack that scraped against the ground, kicking up clouds of dust. Even over the roar of the Land Rover's engine, the metallic, mournful clatter of hundreds of empty tins could be heard. Clink, clank, clink. The sound of utter destitution. "Mummy, look at that lady," Lily whispered, pressing her little nose against the window pane, her eyes wide with childish awe and fear. Bethany instinctively slowed down. Her countrywoman's eyes, accustomed to reading nature's signs, read the signs of imminent death in that old woman. She saw the woman's legs trembling violently with each step. She saw the skin on her arms, weathered and dry as old leather, and she saw that she wore no proper shoes, but worn-out plimsolls that left her feet exposed to the burning stones. "Keep going, Bethany," a fearful voice whispered in her mind. The voice of survival. "You barely have enough petrol to get home. You don't have money to give alms. Don't get into trouble. The world is full of mad people," the old woman stumbled. It was a slight movement, a loss of balance caused by dehydration and extreme exhaustion. She fell to her knees on the sharp gravel, but she didn't let go of her sack. She clung to that bag of rubbish as if it were a treasure of gold and diamonds, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the land of the living. Bethany's heart gave a violent lurch. In that fall, she saw her own grandmother. She saw her mother. She saw the cruel fate awaiting the forgotten. And she remembered the words John always said when he shared his sandwich with the seasonal farm laborers. "No one is so poor they cannot give, nor so rich they need not receive, Bethany. The Almighty measures us by what we give when we lack, not when we have plenty." "We can't leave her there, Lily," Bethany murmured, more to herself than to the child. Her voice sounded firm, erasing the fear. "She's all alone, Mummy. Like my bunny when I found him, the girl replied, hugging her teddy rabbit tighter. Bethany slammed on the brakes. The old tires squealed in protest against the hot tarmac and the Land Rover pulled over, kicking up a golden, dense cloud of dust that enveloped the vehicle for a few seconds. The silence that followed the engine's dying roar was deafening. Only the buzzing of flies and, in the distance, the hoarse gasping of the fallen woman could be heard. Bethany opened the door and the heat struck her face like a physical slap. She got out carefully, smoothing her simple floral cotton dress, and motioned to Lily. "Stay here, my love. Don't get out until I tell you. Lock the door." She walked towards the figure on the ground. The sound of her own steps crunching on the gravel seemed deafening. As she approached, the smell hit her before she could see the details. It smelled of stale sweat, dry urine, clothes that hadn't seen soap in months. It was the smell of human abandonment in its rawest form. The old woman, hearing the footsteps, hunched over, slowly turning her head like a beaten animal awaiting the final blow. Bethany stopped dead. What she saw on that woman's face stole her breath away. Beneath the dirt, the deep wrinkles like river canyons, and the matted gray hair, there were eyes, stormy gray eyes, veiled by cataracts and dry tears, but distilling a terror so pure and a dignity so broken that Bethany felt like crying right there. "Don't hit me. Please don't take my tins. It's all I have," the old woman croaked. Her voice sounded like dry leaves rustling in the wind, broken by thirst. Bethany felt a pang of indignation. Who had hurt this woman so much that her first reaction was to beg for mercy over empty tins? "No one's going to hurt you, dear," Bethany said, softening her tone to a whisper, kneeling on the burning earth, not caring about staining her dress. "I'm Bethany. I just want to help you." The old woman blinked incredulously. She looked at Bethany's hands, rough, working hands, but extended palm open, without weapons, without stones. "Water?" the old woman asked, and the word came out as a painful moan. I'm so thirsty." Bethany didn't think twice. She turned on her heels and ran towards the Land Rover. "Lily, pass me the water bottle, the big one. Quick!" The woman on the ground, whom the world would later know as Mrs. Eleanor, looked up at the blinding sky through the slits of her swollen eyelids. "Oh, dear Lord," she thought, her mind clouded by heat stroke. "If this is the angel of death coming for me, what soft hands she has." But it wasn't death awaiting her on that God-forsaken road. It was the beginning of a test that would shake the foundations of two families. Bethany ran back, unscrewing the bottle cap as she knelt again. With infinite tenderness, she lifted the old woman's head, supporting her fragile neck, and brought the container to her cracked lips. "Slowly, dear, slowly." The water spilled down the dirty chin, washing away streaks of dirt, as the old woman drank with a soul-wrenching desperation. At that moment, under the relentless Texas sun, two destinies crossed, sealed not by a contract, but by a sip of warm water. What Bethany didn't know as she held that woman who looked like a beggar was that she was holding the key to her own future and the sword that would cut off the heads of avarice. The sound of water gurgling in the old woman's dry throat was the only noise that broke the desert silence for a few eternal seconds. Bethany Music held the bottle tilted, watching as life slowly returned to the eyes of that human being who seemed to have been spat out by the earth itself. When the bottle was empty, Mrs. Eleanor let out a long sigh, a sound that came from the depths of her being, music, a mix of relief and shame. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet the compassionate eyes of the young stranger. Her hands, gnarled by arthritis and black with grime, trembled violently in her lap. "God bless you, daughter, Mrs. Eleanor murmured, her voice raspy like sandpaper on wood. "Music, may the Virgin Mary cover you with her mantle." No one had stopped. Everyone just drove past as if I were a dead dog. "Music." Bethany felt a pang in her heart. It wasn't just pity, it was a dull rage against the world's indifference. "It's all right, dear. You're not alone anymore," Bethany said, wiping a drop of water, music, that was sliding down the old woman's chin with her dress sleeve. At that moment, the Land Rover door opened with a metallic screech. "Mummy!" Bethany turned her head, alarmed. "Lily, I told you to stay inside." But the girl was already there, standing on the hot gravel. Music. In her worn-out shoes and her Sunday dress already dirty with dust. Music. She approached the woman who smelled of rubbish and loneliness with hesitant steps. In her hands she clutched Buttons, the one-eyed rabbit. Mrs. Eleanor recoiled, trying to make herself small, trying to hide her own squalor from the child's purity. "Don't come near, child. I smell bad. I'm I'm rubbish, the old woman sobbed, covering her face with her dirty hands. Lily didn't stop. She stood in front of her, and with that instinctive wisdom possessed only by children and saints, extended her teddy towards the old woman. Here, Lily said in her sweet, firm voice. Buttons will look after you. He doesn't care if you smell funny. He's old too. Eleanor slowly lowered her hands. She looked at the worn, loved teddy rabbit, and then at the girl's large, dark eyes. Something broke inside her. The mask of survival she had worn for weeks cracked, letting out a torrent of tears that carved through the dirt on her cheeks, revealing paths of pale skin. Why? Eleanor whimpered, taking the rabbit with a reverence one would give to a sacred relic. Why are you good to me? Bethany stood up, dusting off her knees, feeling the sun burning the back of her neck. She looked at the empty road, at the nothingness from which this woman had come. Because we're human beings, madam, and because no one deserves to be left here like an old discarded thing. Bethany put a hand on her shoulder, ignoring the grime on her clothes. Where are you going? Do you have family we can call? There's nothing for 50 miles around. The question hung in the hot air, heavy as a tombstone. Eleanor pressed her lips together, and her expression changed from pain to a cold, hard bitterness. She looked at her swollen feet, and then raised her gaze to Bethany with a sincerity that chilled the blood. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just walking away from them, she said. And every word dripped with venom. My children, Rupert and Penelope. Bethany frowned. Are they lost? Are they looking for you? Eleanor let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded like bones breaking. Looking for me? She spat with contempt. They threw me out. They changed the locks on my own house. They told me I was a nuisance, that I was too old, that I smelled of illness, and they were ashamed for their friends to see me. Bethany felt the air escape her lungs. The cruelty was unimaginable. They told me, go to a government asylum or die in the street, but you don't fit in here anymore. They took everything from me, daughter, even my dignity. Eleanor pointed to the Hessian sack. This is the only thing they let me take. Teens I collect, so I don't starve. That's what my life is worth to them. Crushed aluminium. The image of children dragging their mother out of the house, slamming the door in her face, was seared into Bethany's mind. She remembered John, who cried in silence every Mother's Day because he never knew his own. And now here was this woman, discarded by those who should have kissed the ground she walked on. Bethany looked at Lily, who was stroking the old woman's dirty hand without fear. Then she looked at her old Land Rover. She thought about the half-empty cupboard on the farm, about the debts, about the uncertainty. You can't, Bethany! You barely have enough to eat yourself! Logic screamed in her head. But then a sudden breeze moved the old woman's scarf, revealing a profile, the curve of her nose, the shape of her forehead. A shiver ran down Bethany's spine. It was absurd, impossible. But for a second, she thought she saw John in the face of that stranger. Blood calls, the grandmothers used to say. And Bethany, a woman of faith, decided to listen. You're not staying here, Bethany declared, with that strength that came to her when defending what was right. Eleanor looked at her, startled. No, I don't want to be a nuisance. I'll go my way. God will provide. God has already provided, madame. He put my Land Rover in your path. Bethany knelt and took the old woman's arm firmly, but gently. Let's go home. At Hopewell Farm, we don't have luxuries. Sometimes we eat beans with weevils, but there's always a roof and a prayer. But I'm dirty. I'll stay in your car, Eleanor protested, trying to pull back, clinging to her shame. The car can be washed with soap and water, madam. But my conscience, that can't be cleaned if I leave you here to your fate, Bethany replied, looking into the old woman's gray eyes. And that sack is coming with us. Bethany walked towards the sack of tins. As she tried to lift it, she was surprised by the weight. It was extremely heavy. It was the weight of days of humiliation under the sun, of bending down 1,000 times for a few pence. With a grunt of effort, she heaved it and threw it into the back of the Land Rover among the empty vegetable crates. She returned and, with Lily's help, helped Mrs. Eleanor to her feet. The old woman was light as a bird, wasted by the recent hard life. Come on, Granny, Lily said, taking her hand. You can sit on my side. Hearing the word Granny, Eleanor closed her eyes, and a solitary tear traced a new path on her dirty face. Her own grandchildren, Rupert's children, didn't even look her in the face, absorbed in their expensive tablets and phones. And this strange child offered her a title she thought she had lost forever. They got into the Land Rover. The interior smelled of trapped heat and dust, but to Eleanor, as she slumped into the passenger seat, it seemed like the most luxurious carriage in the world. Bethany started the engine, which roared in protest before catching. She looked at her new passenger, who hugged buttons and stared out the window incredulously, as if fearing to wake from a dream. "My name is Bethany, and this is Lily." "I'm Eleanor," the old woman replied. And for the first time in months, her name didn't sound like a condemnation, but a promise. Bethany put the Land Rover into first gear, and it pulled back onto the road, leaving behind the place where death had been waiting. As she drove, Bethany kept glancing at Eleanor. There was something about her, a mystery wrapped in rags. What Bethany didn't know was that, in the boot, inside that dirty sack, among the crushed beer and soft drink cans, there was a hand-stitched false bottom. And in that false bottom, wrapped in black plastic to protect them from rain and sweat, were the original documents for an oil property worth more than the entire village put together. But Eleanor said nothing. The test of poverty had just begun. If this stranger's kindness was real, or if, like her children, she would discard her as soon as she saw that she was a difficult burden to bear. The sun began to set, staining the dales blood red, foretelling that the approaching storm would not be of rain, but of justice. The final stretch to Hopewell Farm passed in a reverent silence, broken only by the rhythmic rattling of the Land Rover over the bumps in the gravel track. The sun was beginning to hide, painting the sky in burnt violet and orange tones, colors that in the dales foretell the arrival of evening coolness. Bethany turned the wheel sharply to enter through the main gate. The wooden sign hanging from the entrance arch was lopsided, held by a single rusty nail, and the white paint had peeled so much that the name Hopewell was barely legible. To Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, accustomed to the laser-cut lawns and marble fountains of her son Rupert's estate, this looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. The fields on both sides of the track were yellowed, thirsty, crying out to the heavens for rain that hadn't fallen for months. Old machinery covered in blue tarpaulins stood like sleeping giants, lacking diesel or spare parts. "We're here," Bethany announced, turning off the engine in front of a stone cottage. The structure was humble, with a wide porch where a solitary rocking chair swayed in the wind. 3 mongrel dogs emerged from under the house, barking not with menace, but with the boisterous joy of welcoming their pack. "Quiet, quiet," Lily ordered, jumping down, and the dogs calmed, wagging their tails and sniffing the air curiously at the strange visitor. Bethany walked around the vehicle and opened the passenger door. "Mrs." Eleanor tried to get out, but her legs, stiff from the journey and weakness, failed her. Bethany held her by the waist, not caring that the old woman's stale smell clung to her clothes. "Lean on me, dear. I'm your walking stick now." They entered the house. The first thing that struck Eleanor was not the poverty, which was evident in the mended furniture and polished concrete floor, but the smell. It smelled of home, of wood burning in the stove, of freshly baked bread, and cheap lavender soap. It was an aroma that transported her back 50 years to her mother's kitchen, before money and oil poisoned their blood. "Sit here on the sofa. It's the most comfortable we have," Bethany said, guiding her towards a piece of furniture covered with a hand-stitched patchwork quilt to hide the worn upholstery. Eleanor sank down, feeling her bones appreciate the rest. Her eyes, still adjusting to the dimness of the living room, lit only by a bare bulb, began to scan the place. Everything was impeccably clean. There was no dust. Despite living in the middle of a barren landscape, there was dignity in that poverty. On the wall, a wooden crucifix watched over the room, and below it, on a mantelpiece above the unlit fireplace, there was a small altar with candles and paper flowers. And there it was. Eleanor's gaze froze. Her breathing stopped abruptly, causing a sharp pain in her chest. In the center of the altar, framed in simple wood, was the photograph of a young man with a frank smile, a slightly tilted flat cap, and eyes that Eleanor knew as well as her own. That man, Eleanor stammered, pointing at the photo with a trembling, gnarled finger. "Who is he, Bethany?" Bethany, who was pouring a glass of fresh water from an earthenware carafe, stopped. Her face darkened, a cloud of sadness passing through her dark eyes. She approached the mantelpiece and touched the frame with infinite delicacy. "It's John, my husband," Bethany replied, her voice breaking slightly like fine glass. "He passed away 2 years ago, an accident in the fields." Eleanor felt the world spin. John. The name echoed in her head like a bell. Her sister Rose, whom she hadn't seen for decades due to that stupid family pride, had had a son named John. A son whom Rose's father, a cruel man, had said was stillborn to separate them. Eleanor leaned forward, squinting. The man's chin in the photo, that characteristic cleft, was the mark of the Shaws, her family's mark. My God, is it possible? Eleanor thought, feeling her heart pound like a caged bird. Have you brought me to my dead nephew's house? Is this woman my nephew's wife? She wanted to shout. She wanted to say, "It's me, I'm your Aunt Eleanor. I have money, I can save you." But she bit her tongue until she tasted the metallic tang of blood. No, she couldn't say it yet. She remembered her own children, Rupert and Penelope, looking at her with disgust that morning. She remembered how they had thrown her onto the street. If she revealed who she was, and what she had, would Bethany want her because she was family or because she was rich? The test of poverty had to continue. She had to be sure, absolutely sure. He looked like a good man, Eleanor said, finally swallowing the secret with difficulty. He was the best, Bethany sighed, handing her the glass of water. He worked from dawn till dusk. He loved this land more than anything. That's why I'm still here, fighting the bank, fighting the drought, because this land holds his sweat. The mention of the bank triggered an alert in Eleanor's calculating mind. The bank? She asked, lowering her voice to seem harmless. Do they want to take the farm from us? Bethany confessed, lowering her gaze, embarrassed. We owe 3 months' mortgage. If I don't pay by the end of the month, they'll throw us out. Just like you. The irony struck Eleanor like a slap. She, a multi-millionaire owner of oil fields, was sitting in the living room of a widow who was about to lose everything, and both shared the same fear of destitution. Mummy, I'm hungry, Lily interrupted, entering the living room barefoot. Bethany shook off the sadness and forced a smile. Yes, my love, we're going to have supper. Supper was the decisive moment. Bethany served 3 plates at the small kitchen table. There was no meat, no luxuries. There was hearty lentil stew and some freshly baked bread that Bethany heated directly over the stove flame. In the center, a small piece of cheese, so small it barely sufficed for 1 person. Eleanor watched in silence. She saw Bethany cut the cheese. She put half on Lily's plate. The other half she put on Eleanor's plate. Eat, dear. You need your strength, Bethany said, pushing the plate towards her. And you, daughter? Eleanor asked, looking at Bethany's plate, which only had stew. I'm not that hungry today. I nibbled something on the way, Bethany lied with painful naturalness. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat that wouldn't let her swallow. She knew it was a lie. She had heard Bethany's stomach growl in the Land Rover. This woman who had nothing was taking food from her own mouth to give it to an old stranger who smelled of rubbish. Her children, Rupert and Penelope, had industrial refrigerators full of gourmet food that rotted and was thrown away, and they had denied her a glass of juice that morning. This is it, Eleanor thought, and a tear fell into her earthenware plate. This is wealth, not what I have in the bank, but this. She ate with reverence, savoring the stew as if it were caviar. Every bite was a sacrament of humility. Later, Bethany prepared a bed in a small room that served as a storeroom. The sheets were worn, so thin you could almost see through them, but they smelled clean, of sun and wind. Rest, Mrs. Eleanor. No one will disturb you here. You're safe here, Bethany said, turning off the light and leaving a small candle burning on the bedside table. Tomorrow we'll see what we do. God doesn't close one door without opening a window. When Bethany closed the door, Eleanor was left alone in the dimness. She got up with difficulty and limped to the window. Outside, the desert sky was bursting with stars, a blanket of diamonds over the dry land. She bent down and looked under the bed where Bethany had placed the sack of tins. She reached her hand among the cold, sharp aluminium until she touched the black plastic that enveloped her documents. The property deed, the trust fund statements, the power of attorney papers, worth millions of pounds. She could go out right now, show Bethany the papers, and end her suffering. She could buy this farm 10 times over. She could fill that kitchen with food. But no, Eleanor told herself, clutching the papers to her chest. Not yet. I have to see how far my own flesh and blood's malice goes, and I have to see if Bethany is as strong as she seems. She hid the treasure in the rubbish again. She lay down on the humble bed, looking at the ceiling where a crack drew a capricious map. For the first time in years, Mrs. Eleanor didn't feel alone, but the clock was ticking. The bank was stalking Bethany, and her children, the vultures, were surely already celebrating her disappearance. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The next morning dawned with a sky so blue it hurt the eyes. At Hopewell Farm, the day began before the sun appeared, and Mrs. Eleanor, accustomed to waking to the city's traffic noise or the sterile silence of her empty mansion, opened her eyes to the distant crow of a cock. She rose from the narrow bed, feeling a stiffness in her back that, curiously, bothered her less than the loneliness of her thousands of pounds orthopedic bed. Upon entering the kitchen, she found Bethany already up, kneading flour with a hypnotic, almost violent rhythm, as if wanting to pound her worries against the wooden table. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" Bethany asked without stopping her kneading, though her voice sounded tense, like a guitar string about to break. "Like a log, daughter." "I hadn't slept without pills in years," Eleanor replied, approaching the table. Music. Her hands, gnarled but restless, sought something to do. "Let me help you. I'm no good at sitting and watching." Bethany tried to protest, but Eleanor had already taken a knife and a sack of potatoes. She began peeling them skillfully, a forgotten ability from her youth, when she used to peel kilos of tubers to help her mother. The smell of damp earth from the potatoes and the aroma of boiling herbal tea created an atmosphere of domestic peace that, however, was fragile as glass. Music. Mid-morning, the sound of an engine interrupted the routine. It wasn't the roar of a tractor, but the asthmatic hum of the postman's motorcycle. Bethany froze, dropped the broom she was holding, and looked out the window with the terror of a cornered animal. "It can't be, it's not the end of the month yet," she whispered, and the color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the flour she had kneaded. She went out to the porch, wiping her sweaty hands on her apron. Eleanor followed, staying discreetly in the doorway, watching like a hawk. The postman, an old man named Mr. Davies, who knew the misfortunes of every family in the village, handed her an envelope. It wasn't a normal letter. It was an official rectangular envelope with red borders. "I'm so sorry, Bethany. It's certified. You have to sign, Mr. Davies said, lowering his gaze to the dusty ground, unable to meet the widow's eyes. Bethany signed with a trembling hand. As the motorcycle pulled away, raising a cloud of dust that clung to her damp skin, Bethany stood static under the scorching sun. She tore open the envelope. The sound of ripping paper echoed like a gunshot in the farm's silence. Her eyes scanned the typewritten lines, cold, legal words that knew nothing of droughts or grief, or promises to dead husbands. Imminent foreclosure, eviction in 72 hours, seizure of assets. Bethany's knees gave way. She collapsed on the porch step, crumpling the letter against her chest, as if wanting to stifle the bad news. She didn't scream. The pain was too great for noise. She just folded over herself and began to sob, a dry, choked cry that shook her thin shoulders. Eleanor felt a volcanic fury rise through her veins. It wasn't just empathy, it was anger. Anger against the banks, against injustice, and against fate that preyed on good people. She approached slowly, the sound of her walking stick marking the pace. Clack, clack, clack. She sat down with difficulty next to Bethany and placed her wrinkled hand on the young woman's shoulder. "What's wrong, child? What does that devil's paper say?" Bethany raised her tear-stained face, her eyes swollen and red. "It's over, Mrs. Eleanor. It's all over," she whimpered, her voice a thread of desperation. "They're taking the farm. They're taking the house. In 3 days they're throwing us out." Bethany looked towards the dry fields, towards where Lily played, chasing butterflies, oblivious to the catastrophe. "I failed John. I promised him I'd look after his land, that Lily would grow up here, and I failed him. I have nowhere to go. I have no one." The confession struck Eleanor in the chest. "I have no one." She, Eleanor Shaw, had millions in the bank, properties, shares, and she also felt like she had no one. But the difference was that Bethany had a heart of gold and empty pockets, while Eleanor had full pockets and a heart full of scars from betrayal. Eleanor looked at the crumpled letter. She could take out her phone, which she had hidden, turned off, at the bottom of her sack, call her private banker, and transfer the entire debt in 5 minutes. She could buy the bank if she wanted. But then she remembered the look of contempt from her son Rupert. She remembered her daughter Penelope saying, "Mother, just die. You're just wasting air." If she saved Bethany now with money, it would be easy. But Eleanor needed something more. She needed justice, and she needed to close the cycle of pain in her own life before she could save Bethany. She took Bethany's hands in hers, her gnarled fingers squeezed with surprising strength. "Listen carefully, Bethany," Eleanor said, using her full name with an authority that made the young woman stop crying in surprise. "You are not going to lose this house. I swear it by my mother's memory and by the nails of Christ. You are not going to lose it." "But I don't have any money," Bethany sobbed. "Money comes and goes, daughter. Sometimes the Lord gives it, and sometimes He takes it away, and sometimes it's..." It's the other way around, Eleanor declared, with a mysterious and fierce look. Dry those tears. Don't let Lily see you like this. Fear smells, and vultures gather when they smell fear. Bethany looked at her, confused, but strangely comforted by the old woman's certainty. What can I do? Eleanor looked towards the horizon, where the road disappeared into the distance. Her matriarchal mind, sharpened by years of business and disappointments, concocted a master plan in seconds. You're going to trust me. Tomorrow we'll make a call. I have some unfinished business to settle, some distant relatives who might owe me a favor. Eleanor lied, knowing it wasn't a favor she was going to collect, but a moral debt. Do you think they'll help you? You said they were bad, Bethany doubted. They won't do it out of kindness. They'll do it out of greed. And that, my child, is a stronger leverage than love for certain people. Eleanor stood up with effort, erect, like a dethroned queen preparing her return. Now get up, wash your face. As long as there's life and a roof over our heads, there's no defeat. Bethany stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She didn't understand where the destitute old woman got that strength, but she clung to it like a castaway to a plank. That night, while Bethany prayed the rosary with desperate fervor in front of John's photo, Eleanor went out to the porch. The night wind rustled her gray hair. She took out her mobile phone from the false bottom of her sack and turned it on. The screen illuminated her wrinkled face with a spectral blue light. She had 20 missed calls from Rupert, 10 from Penelope. None were out of concern. All were surely to find out about the will or the keys to the safe. Eleanor dialed Rupert's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. "Prepare yourselves, my children," she whispered to the desert wind. "Come and see your poor mother die. Come and see if you are capable of giving a glass of water to the one who gave you life. This will be your last chance, and if you fail, God have mercy on you, because I will not." The phone began to ring. 1, 2, 3 rings. Someone answered on the other end with an irritated, arrogant voice. "Yes? Who the devil is calling at this hour?" Eleanor smiled, a sad and terrible smile. "It's me, Rupert, your mother." The trap was set. The call had been brief, brutal. Eleanor had hung up the phone with trembling hands, not from fear, but from a cold rage that chilled her to the bone despite the night's warmth. Rupert had asked if she had finally decided to stop making a fool of herself and if she had the insurance papers ready. Not a single. "How are you? Or are you hungry?" Just funeral bureaucracy for a living woman. Eleanor stayed on the porch, staring at the phone's black screen, as if it were a venomous scorpion, until she heard Bethany's soft footsteps behind her. "Dear, who were you talking to?" Bethany asked, her voice laden with that chronic worry typical of women who carry the world alone. Eleanor turned slowly. The light of the full moon illuminated her face, highlighting every wrinkle, every scar of time. But there was something new in her gaze. These were no longer the eyes of the frightened beggar on the road. They were the eyes of a matriarch who had decided to go to war. "Sit down, Bethany. We need to talk," Eleanor said, pointing to the old wicker rocking chair. Her tone brooked no argument. Bethany obeyed, feeling a knot in her stomach. "Is something wrong? Do you want to leave?" "On the contrary, daughter, I've arrived where I needed to arrive." Eleanor took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of dry earth and evening air. "Have you looked at my eyes, Bethany? Have you looked closely?" Bethany blinked, confused. She leaned in a little. "Yes, your eyes are gray. They're beautiful, though sad. They're the same eyes as his." Eleanor nodded towards the inside of the house, to where John's photo rested on the mantelpiece. The silence that followed was dense, charged with static electricity. Bethany looked towards the open door, then at the old woman, and back at the door. Her mind tried to connect points that seemed impossible. "John," she stammered. "John wasn't stillborn, as my sister was told." Eleanor's voice broke, releasing an ancient pain of decades. "My sister's name was Rose Shaw. Our parents threw her out when she got pregnant by a farmhand who wasn't worthy of our family. They told her the baby had died at birth so she wouldn't look for him. But I always suspected. I always knew that blood couldn't disappear just like that." Bethany put her hands to her mouth, stifling a cry. Tears welled up instantly, hot and fast. John always said he felt a part of him was missing, that his mother never loved him. His mother adored him before she even saw him. Eleanor interrupted firmly, tapping her walking stick softly on the floor. "And I am his aunt. I am your husband's aunt, Bethany. And that child sleeping in there, Lily, is my flesh and blood. She is the only clean thing left of my surname." Bethany slid from the chair and fell to her knees in front of Eleanor, hugging her thin legs covered by her dirty skirt. She didn't care about the grime, or the poverty, or the mystery. She only cared that John, her beloved John, had not been alone in the world. "Aunt," Bethany sobbed, burying her face in the old woman's lap. "Oh God, thank you. We're not alone." Eleanor stroked the young woman's dark hair with her gnarled hands, feeling for the first time in years the warmth of an embrace that asked for nothing in return, an embrace that sought not inheritance, but comfort. "Don't cry anymore, my dear. We've cried enough," Eleanor said, gently lifting Bethany's face. "Now we have to be strong, because to save this farm and to save my soul, we have to do something very difficult." Bethany wiped her tears, sniffling, and looked at her new aunt with determination. "Whatever it is, I'll work double shifts." "Sell the Land Rover?" "No," Eleanor cut her off, her eyes shining with cunning. "It's not about working harder. It's about being smarter. We're going to play a game of chess with them, Bethany." "With them?" Bethany instinctively crossed herself. "My children," Eleanor declared with bitterness. "Rupert and Penelope. They have something that belongs to me, something they stole from me. If I can get it back, we'll pay the mortgage on this farm 10 times over. But they won't give it to me if they know I'm alive and well." Eleanor leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I need you to call them tomorrow. Me. But they don't know me." "Exactly. I need you to be the voice of tragedy. I want you to call them and tell them you found me by the roadside, that I'm very ill, that I'm dying." The word came out heavy but necessary. "Tell them I'm delirious, that I don't have a penny, that I smell of rubbish, and that I'm at my last gasp." Bethany frowned, her natural honesty rebelling against the lie. "But Aunt, lying is a sin, and you're not dying, thank God." "It's a white lie, Bethany. Or rather, it's a test of poverty," Eleanor explained, her gaze hardening. "If they come, I want to see why they come. If they come to look after me, I'll give them everything. But if they come like vultures to see what's left of my corpse, then they will know divine justice." Bethany hesitated. She looked towards the dark fields, where the bank's threat felt like an imminent storm. Then she thought of Lily, of her future, and she thought of the cruelty of those children who had thrown this old woman onto the road. "All right," Bethany agreed, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. "What exactly do I tell them?" "Tell them to come to Hopewell Farm. Tell them it's urgent. Tell them that if they don't come tomorrow, the council will put me in a pauper's grave." Eleanor smiled a joyless smile. "That will prick their pride. They won't allow the Shaw name to end up in a pauper's grave, not out of love, but out of what people will say." "And the money?" Bethany asked innocently. "If you recover what they stole from you, will it be enough to pay the 3 months' arrears? It's almost £3,000. Eleanor had to bite her tongue not to laugh at the innocence of the figure. £3,000 was what her daughter Penelope spent on a handbag. "It'll be enough, daughter, trust me. It'll be enough for Lily to go to university, and for you never again to have to cry over a bill," Eleanor promised. "And there'll be enough left over to buy half the county if I want," she added to herself. "Then I'll do it," Bethany said, standing up. "First thing tomorrow morning. No, do it when the sun is high, when the heat is unbearable. Let them know that coming here is a sacrifice," Eleanor instructed. "And one more thing, Bethany." "Yes, Aunt?" "From now on, you are not my savior. You are a simple farmer who took me in. Let them treat you badly. Let them look down on you. Endure it, because the higher they lift their nose, the harder their fall will be." Bethany nodded, though she felt a cold knot in her stomach. She was no actress, she was a countrywoman. But for her family, for John, and for this old woman who had brought a miracle wrapped in rags, she would become whatever was necessary. "Rest, Aunt Eleanor. Tomorrow the battle begins." Eleanor remained alone on the porch for another moment, took out her old mobile again, and looked at the wallpaper photo, an old image of her hugging 2 small children, Rupert and Penelope, dressed in their Sunday best. "I loved them so much," she whispered to the night, and a solitary tear rolled down her cheek, lost in the wrinkles of her chin. "I gave them everything, and look what they did with it." She put the phone away and went into the house. The stage was set. The trap was armed with the most irresistible bait for greed, the death of a poor relative who was no longer a hindrance. Tomorrow, Hopewell Farm would receive the demons, and Bethany would have to open the door for them. Midday at Hopewell Farm descended like an iron hammer. The heat was so dense that the trembling air over the dry land seemed liquid. The cicadas sang their deafening symphony, the only sound capable of competing with the accelerated beating of Bethany's heart. Sitting at the kitchen table, Bethany stared at Eleanor's old mobile phone as if it were a grenade about to explode. Her hands, accustomed to the roughness of the hoe and the soil, were sweating cold. Eleanor sat opposite her, shelling beans with a frightening calm. She had purposely smudged her face with a little charcoal and disheveled her gray hair to look even more gaunt. "It's time, daughter," Eleanor said, without looking up from the beans. At this hour, Rupert is in his office, counting money or shouting at some employee, and Penelope will be at her club drinking mimosas and complaining about how hard her life is. Bethany swallowed. The knot in her throat was painful. "Aunt, what if they shout at me? What if they say no? If they shout, you endure. If they say no, you insist. Tell them that if they don't come to sign the medical liability waiver, you'll call the police to report abandonment of a vulnerable adult. They fear nothing more than a police scandal," Eleanor instructed with the coldness of a general in battle. "Dial Rupert's number. He's the cruelest, but he's the one in charge." Bethany dialed the number with trembling fingers. She put it on speaker, just as Eleanor had asked, so they could both hear. You. Well, a dry, sharp male voice answered. In the background, the frantic typing of a computer could be heard. "Speak quickly, I'm in the middle of a major merger." Bethany took a deep breath, drawing strength from her aunt's steely gaze. "Mr. Rupert Shaw?" "The same." "Who's speaking?" "If it's the bank offering me credit cards, you're wasting your time." "No, sir. My name is Bethany. I'm calling from Hopewell Farm near the Dales. I have your mother here." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a heavy silence laden with annoyance. "My mother?" Rupert repeated, his tone changing from haste to disgust. "I thought that woman was. Anyway, what does she want now? Money? Tell her I have no cash." Eleanor closed her eyes and squeezed a bean pod until it snapped. Bethany felt a wave of indignation, but stuck to the script. "She's not asking for money, sir. She's very ill. I found her by the roadside, dehydrated and delirious. She doesn't know where she is. I think she's dying." "Dying?" Rupert scoffed, as if his mother's death were a logistical inconvenience in his schedule. "Look, madam, my mother is very dramatic. She probably just wants attention. Take her to a public hospital and let them give her an aspirin." "Sir, you don't understand," Bethany insisted, raising her voice slightly, injecting urgency. "She can't get out of bed. She's trembling a lot and saying strange things. I'm a poor woman. I don't have money for medicine or doctors. If she dies here in my house, the police will come asking why her children abandoned her like this, and I'll have to give them your number." The mention of the police had the effect Eleanor had predicted. "Don't you dare involve the police in this," Rupert barked. "Good heavens. That old woman always causing me problems until the very end. Listen carefully, peasant. Don't do anything stupid. Where is that filthy farm?" "At mile 40 on the old road, past the dry bridge." "I'll come. But listen, I'm coming to resolve this matter once and for all. If she's as bad as you say, I'll call social services to take her to a state asylum. I don't intend to carry her, and don't think I'm going to pay you for rescuing her. You did it because you wanted to. Just come, sir." "She's asking for you," Bethany lied, feeling nauseous. "I'll be there in 3 hours, and tell her to stay put." Rupert hung up without saying goodbye. Bethany put the phone down, trembling with rage. "He's a monster, Aunt. How can he talk about you like that?" Eleanor opened her eyes. There were no tears, only an infinite, crystallized disappointment. "Money corrupts the soul if you have no foundations, Bethany." Rupert always wanted more than he deserved. Now call Penelope. The call to her daughter was different, but just as poisonous. "Hello?" A shrill, drawn-out voice answered. "Who is this?" "This is my private number. Mrs. Penelope. I'm Bethany. I have your mother, Mrs. Eleanor. She's very ill at my house." "Oh no," Penelope cried, but it wasn't a cry of pain, but of complaint. "Why me? Just today I have my spa session and tonight dinner with the Montemayor's. Mother always ruins everything." "Madam, you need to come. Your brother Rupert is already on his way." The mention of Rupert ignited the sibling rivalry. "Rupert's going there?" Penelope asked with immediate suspicion. "Why is he going? Did Mum have anything? Does she have jewelry?" "No, madam, she only has a sack of tins and dirty clothes. She smells very bad. She needs help." "How disgusting!" Penelope exclaimed with genuine repulsion. "My God, how embarrassing. If my friends find out my mother is a vagrant, I'll die." "All right, I'll go. But I'm not going to touch her if she's dirty. Tell her to, I don't know, spray her with the hose or something." Bethany hung up before losing control and screaming a few truths at her. She stared at the phone, feeling she needed to wash her hands and ears with bleach. "They're coming, Aunt, both of them," Bethany said in a low voice. Eleanor nodded slowly, and stood up with the help of the table. Good. Now we have to set the stage, Bethany. This house is too clean for their taste. They need to see misery to feel superior. What do you mean? Take that nice quilt off the sofa. Let the broken springs show. Hide the food. Let only water be visible on the table. And you, get your dress a little dirty. I want them to see us as insects, Bethany. I want them to feel so secure in their arrogance that they loosen their tongues and say everything they think. Bethany obeyed, though it pained her to deface her home. She removed the paper flowers, hid the embroidered tablecloth. The house, stripped of its loving touches, looked sad and poor, just as it was seen by the soulless eyes of Eleanor's children. One more thing, Eleanor said, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, her gaze fixed on the dirt track that snaked towards the road. When they arrive, don't defend me. Let them humiliate me. I don't know if I can bear that, Aunt. You have to, because every insult they throw at me today will be another nail in their coffin. It's necessary for them to completely remove their mask. Bethany stood beside her, arms crossed, feeling the sun's heat and the cold of fear. In the distance, on the horizon, a cloud of dust began to rise. It was them. The vultures had smelled blood and were coming to finish the job, but they didn't know that the prey they thought was dying had sharp claws and was ready to hunt. May God forgive us for the trap, Aunt, Bethany whispered. God loves justice, daughter, Eleanor replied, gripping her walking stick. And today, on this farm, justice will be done. The usual silence of Hopewell Farm, woven with the cicada's song and the whisper of the dry wind through the bushes, was brutally torn apart. It wasn't thunder or the roar of a wild animal, but the mechanical, powerful sound of engines that didn't belong in that world of dirt and sweat. In the distance, two bright spots appeared on the gravel track, growing rapidly into metal monsters. A polished black sedan, gleaming like a dark mirror, led the way, closely followed by a silver SUV, so tall and robust it looked like a war tank, designed for the shopping center. Bethany watched from the kitchen window, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. "They're here, Aunt," she announced, her voice trembling not with fear, but with nauseating anticipation. Eleanor, seated in the old rocking chair in the living room, adjusted the frayed blanket over her legs. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, inhaling the humble home smell that her children were about to desecrate, and when she opened them, the strong matriarch of the previous night was gone. In her place was a fragile, trembling, defeated old woman. The disguise was complete. "Let them in, Bethany, and remember, you are invisible to them. You are merely the servant of fate." The vehicles screeched to a halt in front of the porch, raising a cloud of ochre dust that enveloped the immaculate bodywork like an insult from the earth. The black sedan door opened. First came a shining, perfectly Italian leather shoe that landed with disgust on the loose soil. Then Rupert emerged. He was a tall man, with slicked back hair, not a single strand out of place, and a tailored grey suit that cost more than the farm produced in 5 years. He removed his sunglasses and looked around with a grimace of absolute disgust, as if the simple act of breathing the country air was polluting his lungs. He brushed an invisible speck of dust from his lapel and looked at his shoes, which were already beginning to be covered with a thin layer of dirt. "Filthy," he muttered, kicking a small stone. From the other vehicle, Penelope got out. She wore a white linen dress, ridiculously inappropriate for a rural visit, and stiletto heels that immediately sank into the soft earth, making her stumble. "Oh, my shoes!" she shrieked, clutching her SUV door. "Rupert, this place is a pigsty. How could Mum possibly choose to die in this dump?" Bethany stepped onto the porch, smoothing her dirty apron, swallowing her pride. "Good afternoon. You must be Mrs. Eleanor's children." Rupert went up the porch steps, 2 by 2. Ignoring the hand Bethany extended in courtesy, he walked past her as if she were a fence post, without even deigning to look her in the eyes. "Where is she?" he barked, entering the house without asking permission. Penelope followed behind, pulling a perfumed silk handkerchief from her handbag and covering her nose and mouth. She looked Bethany up and down, pausing at her worn sandals and rough hands. "You're the one who called, I suppose," Penelope said in a nasal voice muffled by the handkerchief. "I hope you've served water or something. I don't want to catch lice or anything strange." Bethany felt her blood boil, but lowered her head. "Come in. She's in the living room." The invasion was total. Penelope's expensive, cloying perfume and Rupert's aggressive cologne filled the small living room, battling against the smell of wood smoke and stew. Rupert stopped dead when he saw his mother. Eleanor was huddled in the rocking chair, wrapped in rags, her head bowed, and her trembling hands clutching the armrests. She looked like a small bundle of misery. "Mother," Rupert said. There was no warmth or concern. His tone was that of a boss scolding an incompetent employee. "Look at you, you're a disgrace." Eleanor slowly looked up. Her watery gray eyes settled on her firstborn. "Rupert, you came," she croaked. "Of course I came. Someone has to clean up your mess," he retorted, crossing his arms without approaching. "You disappear for months, make us look ridiculous with club members thinking you'd gone on a European trip, and you turn out to be here playing the vagrant." Penelope peeked from behind her brother's shoulder, maintaining a safe distance of 2 meters. "Oh, Mom, you smell like a cowshed," she exclaimed with a grimace of genuine repulsion. "How could you fall so low? What did you do with the clothes I left in the rubbish bag when you left?" "They were stolen," Eleanor lied, coughing weakly. "I slept under a bridge, daughter. I was cold." "Well, you should have gone to the municipal shelter," Rupert interrupted impatiently. "We told you you couldn't stay in the big house. That house is a company asset now, and you no longer fit the corporate image, Mother. You're senile. Look at yourself." Bethany, standing in the kitchen doorway, gritted her teeth so hard her jaw ached. She wanted to scream at them. She wanted to chase them out with a broom, but Eleanor's sideways glance kept her glued to her spot. "I'm thirsty," Eleanor pleaded, stretching a trembling hand towards Penelope. Penelope instinctively recoiled a step, as if her mother's hand were a contagious claw. "Oi!" Penelope shouted, addressing Bethany, snapping her fingers. "Are you deaf? Bring her water. And make it bottled, not tap water. We don't want her to get cholera or something." Bethany took a deep breath, counted to 3, and went to the kitchen. She returned with a mismatched glass full of water from the carafe. She gave it to Eleanor with tenderness, helping her to drink. "Thank you, daughter," Eleanor whispered, emphasizing the word daughter. Rupert watched the scene impatiently, consulting his solid gold watch. "Right, enough of this theater. We don't have all day. I have a business dinner at 8, and this is in the middle of nowhere." He pulled a leather folder from his briefcase and extracted some documents full of stamps and small print. "Penelope and I have spoken," Rupert announced, approaching the rocking chair, but being careful not to brush against the dirty blanket. "As it's evident you can no longer care for yourself and have lost your mind. Look where you are. For heaven's sake, we have arranged your immediate admission to the state-run care home, Street, Jude's home for the forgotten." Bethany stifled a gasp. She knew that place. It was a warehouse for the elderly, a place where people went to await death amidst soiled sheets and constant sedation. It was free and infamous for its neglect. "The state home?" Eleanor asked in a faint voice. But you have money, Rupert. You change cars every year." "Penelope, your handbags." "That has nothing to do with it," Penelope retorted, offended. "Our money is ours, Mum. You've lived your life. Besides, the state home is suitable for your condition. We're not going to spend the grandparents' inheritance on a luxury private care home for you to forget who we are in a week." "Sign here," Rupert ordered, placing the paper on his mother's lap and offering her a Mont Blanc pen. "It's a waiver of rights and a consent form for voluntary admission. It also gives us full power over any remnants left in your accounts, though I doubt there's anything left." Eleanor looked at the paper. The letters danced before her eyes. It was her civil death sentence. Her children had not come to see if she was well. They had come to ensure she ceased to be a legal problem. "And if I don't sign?" Eleanor asked, fixing her gaze on Rupert. Rupert leaned in, and for a second his attractive face transformed into a mask of pure cruelty. "If you don't sign, we leave you here, in this pigsty, without money, without medicine, in the care of this country bumpkin," he said, pointing at Bethany with disdain. "And when you die of an infection or hunger, we won't even go to the funeral. You'll go to a pauper's grave, Mother. You decide. An asylum with a roof and state food, or rot here in the ground." The room fell silent, a heavy silence broken only by the buzzing of a fly that flew around Penelope's perfect hairstyle. At that moment, Lily, who had been hiding behind her bedroom door, came out clutching her rabbit. Curiosity had overcome fear. "Why are they mean to Granny?" the girl asked in her clear, innocent voice. Rupert turned sharply, as if stung by an insect. He looked at the girl and then at Bethany with a grimace of utter disgust. "See, Penelope, there are dirty children running around everywhere. This is unsanitary. Mum's gonna catch something." "Go away, child," Penelope hissed. "This is adult conversation." Bethany stepped forward, placing herself between the vultures and her daughter. Her patience had broken. "Don't you speak to my daughter like that," Bethany said, and her voice, though low, had the edge of a machete. "This is my home, and even if it's poor and dirty to you, it's respected here." Rupert let out a dry laugh. "Your home, please. This barely qualifies as a shack. You should thank us for taking the old woman away. We're relieving you of a burden." He turned back to Eleanor, ignoring Bethany again. "Sign, Mother." "I'm already roasting here." Eleanor took the pen. Her hand trembled, but not from weakness, but from the adrenaline of the final decision. "All right," Eleanor said. "I'll sign. But first I want one thing." "What?" Rupert scoffed. "One last whim? I want you to tell me, looking me in the eyes, if you ever loved me, if I was ever your mother, and not just your bank." Rupert and Penelope exchanged a look of annoyance. "Oh, Mum, how melodramatic," Penelope sighed, looking at her nails. "Of course we loved you. When you bought us things, when you were useful. But people get old, Mum. It's the cycle of life. You've given what you had to give. Now, well, now you're a hindrance. It's the truth. It's pure biology, Mother," Rupert added coldly. "Children displace parents. Don't take it personally. Sign and let's go." Eleanor lowered her gaze to the paper. The truth had been spoken. There was no love, no gratitude, only biology and greed. "No," Eleanor whispered. "What did you say?" Rupert asked, approaching dangerously. Eleanor raised her head, and at that instant, she stopped trembling. She dropped the luxury pen, which fell to the concrete floor with a sharp clink. "I said I'm not signing anything today." Her voice sounded a little stronger, a little less broken. "I'm tired. I want to sleep. If you want my signature, you'll have to come back tomorrow and bring a real solicitor, not these papers you printed in your office." Rupert's face turned red with anger. "Are you wasting my time? Sign now, or I swear I'll—" "You'll hit me here in front of witnesses?" Eleanor interrupted, holding his gaze. Rupert clenched his fists, but looked at Bethany, who was standing by the door with her arms crossed, watching everything. He knew he couldn't use physical force. "Fine," Rupert spat, picking up his pen from the floor and wiping it with a handkerchief. "We'll be back first thing tomorrow with a notary, and you'll sign, Mother, or I swear I'll have this farm demolished with you inside if necessary. Let's go, Penelope. This place makes me nauseous." The children turned on their heels and left the house as if fleeing a fire. The luxury car engines roared with fury, kicking up more dust as they sped down the dirt track. When the sound faded, silence returned to the farm. But it was a different silence. No longer of fear, it was the silence before the storm. Eleanor slumped against the back of the rocking chair, exhausted by the performance and the pain of rejection. "That's it, Bethany. They've removed their masks." Bethany rushed to her side and knelt, taking her cold hands. "It's okay, Aunt. They were horrible." Eleanor looked towards the empty doorway, and a solitary tear, the last she would shed for them, slid down her cheek. "They're poor, Bethany. They're the poorest people I've ever met in my life." Then, her expression hardened. The pain turned to steel. "Tomorrow they'll come with a notary." "Perfect, because I also have someone to invite." She looked at Bethany with flaming eyes. "Bethany, I need you to go to Pickering. Look for Mr. Arthur. He's old, a bit deaf, but he's the most honest man in the region. Tell him Eleanor Shaw has returned from the dead and needs to draw up a new will." Bethany drove towards Pickering with her heart in her throat, squeezing every drop of power from the old Land Rover's engine. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a violent, almost apocalyptic orange that reflected in the rearview mirror. Music. The village of Pickering was a place where time seemed to have stopped for lack of funds. The streets were dusty, music, and businesses closed early. Bethany braked in front of a worn colonial building with a wooden sign that creaked in the wind. "Mr. Arthur Davies, solicitor and notary." Mr. Arthur was an institution in the region, an 80-year-old man with skin like ancient parchment, music, and a moral code as rigid as his spine. He was about to close his office, turning off the lights in his office full of law books that smelled of damp and wisdom, when Bethany burst in, panting and sweating. "Mr. Arthur, wait!" The old man adjusted his bifocals and looked at her curiously. "Bethany, what are you doing here at this hour, child? Is it about the bank? I told you I can try to ask for an extension, but music, it's not the bank, solicitor. It's a matter of life and death. I need you to come to the farm right now. Now, daughter, my bones aren't up for nighttime treks on that road anymore. Please, music. It's about Mrs. Eleanor Shaw." The name had the effect of lightning. "Mr. Arthur stood motionless, the key to the door half-turned. "Eleanor Shaw?" he whispered, as if invoking a ghost. "Everyone says she disappeared. Her children say she went to Europe and lost her mind. She's at my house, and if you don't come to help her tomorrow, she'll lose everything she has left." 15 minutes later, the old solicitor's sedan followed the dust trail of Bethany's Land Rover towards Hopewell Farm. By the time they arrived, night had completely fallen. The farm was plunged into that deep country darkness, broken only by the yellow light coming from the kitchen window. Mr. Arthur entered with slow steps, leaning on his mahogany walking stick. Seeing the woman seated at the kitchen table, dressed in humble but clean clothes, Bethany had lent her a dress of hers while she washed the rags for tomorrow's show. The solicitor removed his hat with respect and astonishment. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, and his voice trembled. "My old eyes didn't believe what my ears heard. You're changed." Eleanor smiled, a tired but sharp smile. "Life takes many turns, Arthur, and sometimes it drags us through the mud so we learn to value solid ground. Her children, Rupert called me weeks ago. He wanted to declare her legally absent to take control of the oil trust. I refused without a body or proof," the solicitor informed, sitting opposite her. "You did well, old friend. You did well." Bethany served herbal tea, observing the scene in silence. She didn't fully understand. Trust fund. Oil. She knew her aunt had money, but those words sounded like another world. "They told me they're coming tomorrow with a city notary to make me sign a total cession and put me in the state asylum," Eleanor said, taking a sip of tea. Mr. Arthur hit the table with his fist. "That's illegal. It's coercion. If you are in full possession of your faculties." "I am, Arthur, more lucid than ever. But they believe I'm a senile, poor old woman. And that's exactly what I want them to believe, until the very last second." Eleanor looked at Bethany. "Daughter, bring the sack." Bethany went to the corner where the sack of tins rested. She dragged it to the center of the kitchen. The clinking of the aluminium filled the silence. "Tins?" the solicitor asked, confused. "Is this what you want to protect, Mrs. Eleanor?" "Not what's on top, what's underneath." Eleanor stood up, took a kitchen knife, and with surprising force, slashed the bottom of the sack. The tins rolled noisily and brightly across the concrete floor. Bethany and Mr. Arthur watched, mesmerized. Beneath the rubbish, there was a rectangular package wrapped in layers of black plastic and adhesive tape. Eleanor took it and placed it on the table, moving aside the teacups. She tore the plastic. A blue leather folder appeared with the gold emblem of an international bank and the seal of the federal government. "This is the title deed and the Articles of Association of the San Gabriel Trust," Eleanor announced, placing her hand on the folder. "My children sold the house, the cars, the shares in the construction company, but they forgot this. Or rather, they never knew how to read the small print of my husband's inheritance." She opened the folder. "Mr. Arthur adjusted his glasses and leaned in. His eyes widened as he read the figures. "Good heavens," the solicitor murmured, paling. "Mrs. Eleanor, these are the exploitation rights to the wells in the North Sea Basin. The accumulated royalties from the last 5 years are intact," Eleanor completed, "blocked in an account that only opens with my signature and my in-person fingerprint." Bethany approached, looking at the papers without understanding the numbers, but understanding the solicitor's reaction. It's a lot of money, Aunt." Mr. Arthur looked at the young widow and let out a nervous laugh. "Daughter, with this you could buy the entire village, pave it with marble, and still have enough left over to buy the bank that wants to take your house." The silence that followed was absolute. Bethany felt her legs give way and had to sit down. It wasn't joy she felt, but vertigo. She had been protecting a woman who carried an empire in a bag of rubbish. "But it's not the money that matters now," Eleanor said, closing the folder with a dry thud. "It's the destiny of that money." She looked at Mr. Arthur with intensity. "Arthur, get your portable typewriter. I know you have it in the car. We're going to draw up a new will right now." "What are your instructions?" the solicitor asked, regaining his professional posture. "Ready for the legal battle." Eleanor looked at Bethany, who was still in shock, her eyes full of tears, not from the money, but from the magnitude of the secret. Then she looked towards the room where Lily slept. "I hereby disinherit Rupert Shaw and Penelope Shaw, entirely for reasons of unworthiness, ingratitude, and abandonment." Eleanor dictated in a firm voice, each word falling like a sentence. "And I name as universal heir of all my present and future assets my daughter-in-law Bethany Smith and my great-niece Lily Shaw." Bethany jumped out of the chair. "No, Aunt, I can't accept that. It's too much. They, They are your children. They lost that right when they threw me onto the street, Bethany, Eleanor said, taking her hand. You gave me water when I was thirsty. You gave me shelter when I was cold. And you gave me love when I felt like a monster. Blood makes you kin, but loyalty makes you family. But it's too much. I just want to pay the mortgage, Bethany sobbed. You'll pay the mortgage and then you'll help others. I know you will because your heart is good. Money in my children's hands is poison. In your hands, it will be fertilizer for this land. Mr. Arthur, his eyes shining with contained emotion, nodded. He went to fetch his typewriter. The night passed with the clatter of keys. Tack, tack, tack. Ding. It was the sound of justice being forged, letter by letter. They drafted the document with surgical care. Mr. Arthur used every legal term, every protective clause, shielding the will against any future challenge. When they finished, it was 3 inches the morning. Eleanor signed with a steady hand. Bethany and Mr. Arthur signed as witnesses. It's done, the solicitor said, sealing the document with red wax, an antique touch that gave solemnity to the act. Now, Mrs. Eleanor, you are legally the mistress of your destiny again. Thank you, old friend. What do I do now? Bethany asked, exhausted, but with a nervous energy coursing through her body. Now get a couple of hours sleep, Eleanor said, hiding the blue folder again. But this time not in the rubbish, but under Bethany's mattress. And tomorrow, prepare for the theater. What's going to happen tomorrow? Bethany asked with trepidation. Eleanor approached the window and looked out into the darkness where coyotes howled at the moon. Tomorrow my children will come, believing they're going to pluck a dead chicken, and they'll find a royal eagle. Eleanor turned, and her gray eyes shone with a dangerous light. And you, Bethany, you'll be by my side, not as the servant, but as the owner of all this. But shh, let it be a surprise. Dawn came quickly, bringing with it a blood-red sky. At 9 o'clock, the dust on the horizon announced the return of the vultures. This time they brought reinforcements, a corrupt city notary, and the arrogant certainty of victory. Bethany smoothed her apron, said a quick Hail Mary, and opened the door. The final judgment was about to begin. At 9 o'clock in the morning, dust rose again on the driveway to Hopewell Farm, announcing the arrival of the executioners. The sun, already high and aggressive, seemed like an interrogation spotlight pointed directly at the humble cottage porch. Bethany stood by the door with her arms crossed over her chest, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. She had hidden Lily in the barn with the excuse of feeding the chickens. She didn't want her daughter to witness the cruelty that was about to unfold. The luxury vehicle stopped with the same abruptness as the previous day. Rupert got out first, followed by Penelope, and this time, a third man. He was a short, bold, sweating fellow in a cheap, ill-fitting suit and a synthetic leather briefcase under his arm. That's the notary they brought. Bethany whispered towards the living room, where Eleanor was already in position. Mr. Snivel. Eleanor identified with a murmur, recognizing the man, a third-rate legal hack who would forge his own mother's signature for a few quid. Perfect. Rupert strode onto the porch without greeting, lightly pushing Bethany aside. Get out of the way. Today I don't have time for your servant dramas. They entered the living room. The air instantly became dense, charged with the tension of 3 predators cornering prey they believed to be defenseless. Eleanor looked up from her rocking chair. She wore the same dirty dress that Bethany had purposely smudged with dirt that morning, and her hands were clasped in her lap, feigning uncontrollable trembling. Good morning, Mother, Rupert said with a false smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. I present Mr. Snivel. He's going to help us speed everything up. The notary wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief and nodded nervously. A pleasure, Mrs. Shaw. Your children have explained your delicate situation. We are here to help you. Penelope stayed near the door, fanning herself with an old magazine she had found, looking at the peeling walls with disgust. Let's get this over with. The damp smell is making me dizzy. Rupert snapped his fingers, and the notary opened his briefcase on the small coffee table, taking out a wad of documents. It's very simple, Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. Snivel explained, using a condescending tone as if speaking to a small child. Here we have a universal deed of assignment. Basically, you assign control of any remaining assets, forgotten bank accounts, and properties to your children. For what purpose? Eleanor asked in a weak voice. To manage them for your benefit, of course. Rupert quickly intervened. To pay for your medical expenses at the asylum. And here, the notary continued, pulling out another paper, is the informed consent for your immediate admission to the state-run care home, St. Jude's Home for the Forgotten. Bethany, from the corner of the room, felt a wretch. She knew that asylum was a place where people went to die alone, amidst soiled sheets and neglect. Eleanor looked at the papers. The black letters seemed like cell bars. She knew exactly what they were. A sentence of civil death. If she signed that, her children would have the legal power to lock her up and forget about her forever. But Eleanor wasn't going to sign yet. She needed one last confirmation. She needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that not a drop of humanity remained in those hearts she herself had nurtured. "Oh, children," Eleanor said, and her voice trembled with a vulnerability that made Bethany bite her lip to keep from intervening. "Before I sign, I need to ask you something." Rupert rolled his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "What is it now, Mother? Do you want water again?" "No. I want to know if you'll visit me." The question hung in the air, heavy and painful. "I'm afraid of being alone in that place," Eleanor continued, letting a real tear roll down her dirty cheek. "I'm old, my bones ache. I don't want to die surrounded by strangers. Promise me you'll come to see me on Sundays, that you'll bring me flowers." Penelope let out a nervous, cruel giggle. "Oh, Mum, please don't be ridiculous. Sundays are my spa days. Besides, those places are depressing. We'll visit you when we can, at Christmas maybe. And you, Rupert?" Eleanor turned her face towards her eldest son. "You'll go. You were my golden boy. I always gave you everything you asked for." Rupert adjusted his tie knot. Uncomfortable, but his response was an icy dagger. "Mother, I'm a busy man. I don't have time to sit and watch you drool in a wheelchair. We're paying for your roof and food," he lied, as the asylum was free. "That's more than you deserve after running away and embarrassing us like this. Be grateful." Eleanor's heart hardened a little more, turning to volcanic stone. "I see," she whispered. "So it's just a formality. You discard me like an old piece of furniture." "It's best for everyone," Rupert declared, losing patience. "Sign now, Snivel. Give her the pen." The notary handed her a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. Eleanor took it, but her hand remained suspended in the air. I have a debt," she said suddenly. Rupert tensed. "What debt? Who do you owe money to?" "To her," Eleanor said, pointing at Bethany with the pen. "This girl took me in, fed me from her own plate when I was starving. I owe her. I owe her for medicines. My back hurts a lot. I need painkillers." She looked at her children, pleading. Do you have £5, just £5, to give Bethany so she can buy me something for the pain before I go to the asylum? Please, it's the only thing I ask." It was the ultimate test of poverty. £5, an insignificant amount for them, who wore £1,000 shoes. Penelope scoffed with indignation. "Unbelievable. Now we have to support your servant too. That woman did it because she wanted to, Mum. It's her problem." Rupert reached into his trouser pocket. He pulled out a handful of loose coins and a crumpled £1 note. He looked at it with disdain, and then, with a gesture Bethany would never forget, he tossed it to the floor. The coins rolled across the concrete, clinking with a metallic, sad sound. The note fell near Eleanor's bare feet. "There you go," Rupert said with contempt. "For your aspirants, and she should consider herself well paid. I'm not giving you another penny. Now sign." Bethany stepped forward, trembling with fury. Her hands were clenched into fists so tight her nails dug into her palms. "Pick up that money!" Bethany shouted, forgetting the plan for a second. "Have some respect for your mother!" Rupert turned to her, invading her personal space with menacing aggression. "You shut up, you insolent servant," he yelled in her face. "This is a family matter. If you open your mouth again, I'll have you evicted from this dump today. Leave her, Bethany," Eleanor ordered in a dry voice. Bethany stopped, breathing heavily with tears of rage in her eyes. She looked at Eleanor, waiting for the signal. "Enough, Aunt. Tell them. Kill them with the truth now," she thought. But Eleanor said nothing. She bent down with difficulty, and with a dignity that contrasted with the humiliation of the act, she picked up the £1 note from the floor, smoothing it on her knee. £1, Eleanor murmured, looking at the note as if it were a relic. "This is what I'm worth to you, my son. £1 and some coins. It's what you have, Mother, and you have nothing." Rupert replied with absolute cruelty. "Sign. We're getting late." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You're right, Rupert. One is worth what one has." She positioned the paper on the table. The notary Snivel smiled, savoring his easy fees. Penelope sighed with relief, already thinking about her 11 o'clock massage. Rupert looked at his watch, victorious. Eleanor brought the tip of the pen to the paper. "Wait," Eleanor said, stopping just before touching the sheet. "There's an error in this document." "What error?" Snivel asked, annoyed. I drafted it myself. I, Eleanor Shaw, in a state of destitution. Eleanor read. That's not correct. Rupert slammed his fist on the table. For God's sake, you are a pauper. Look at you. You live on the charity of a farmer. Sign at once. Eleanor looked up, and then it happened. The fragility disappeared. The trembling of her hands ceased. Her back, previously hunched, slowly straightened until it touched the back of the rocking chair, and her eyes, her gray eyes, previously watery and pleading, dried and shone with the cold fire of an imminent execution. She smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a mother. It was the smile of a judge dictating sentence. I am not destitute, Rupert, Eleanor said, and her voice sounded clear, strong, resonant, without a trace of the weakness she had feigned. And this makeshift notary is no good for what we are going to do today. Rupert and Penelope took a step back, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. What are you talking about? You crazy old woman? Eleanor looked towards the kitchen door. Come in, Arthur. It's time for the reading. From the shadows of the kitchen, where he had been listening to every insult, every taunt, and the sound of the coins falling to the floor, emerged Mr. Arthur. He walked slowly, in his old but impeccable suit, holding a blue folder under his arm that Rupert recognized instantly. The color drained from Rupert's face as if a vein had been opened. Mr. Morales, Penelope stammered, recognizing their father's old solicitor. What is he doing here? Eleanor stood up unassisted, without her walking stick, dropped the cheap pen on the table, and looked at her children from a moral height they would never reach. He is here to read my true will, Eleanor said, and to explain to you how much that £1 coin you threw on the floor is really worth. Rupert looked at the blue folder, then at his mother, then at Bethany, who was now smiling with fierce satisfaction. Mother? Rupert asked, his voice small, terrified. What's going on? Eleanor took a step forward, and the sound of her sandals against the floor was like a hammer blow. What's happening, my son, is that you failed the test, and now you're going to pay the tuition. The presence of Mr. Arthur Morales filled the small living room with a gravity that stifled the visitor's arrogance. The notary Snivel, recognizing the old solicitor, a living legend in the county courts for his unshakable integrity, began to sweat profusely and closed his briefcase with a quick, guilty movement, like a rat sensing a cat. Mr. Morales, Rupert repeated, his voice cracking into a high, almost childlike note. His eyes were fixed on the blue folder Arthur held against his chest. That folder is from the International Bank. That's right, Rupert. Arthur responded in a grave voice, advancing to the table. He ignored the chair. Snivel occupied music and remained standing, erect like an ancient oak. And it contains the documents that you and your sister conveniently ignored when you sold the family home. Eleanor remained standing. She no longer trembled. She removed the dirty scarf from her head, letting her gray hair fall over her shoulders, and smoothed her stained dress with a dignity that transformed rags into a royal mantle. Sit down, music, Eleanor ordered. It was not an invitation, it was a command. Rupert and Penelope collapsed onto the rickety sofa, as if their tendons had been cut. What's happening, Mum? Penelope shrieked, her perfect makeup beginning to crack with panic. Music. What is all this? You said you were poor. We saw the tins. You saw what you wanted to see, Eleanor replied coldly. You saw dirt because your souls are dirty. You saw poverty because you only value money. She gestured to Arthur. Read. Solicitor, let them know what they scorned for £1. Mr. Arthur opened the blue folder. The sound of crinkling paper echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. He adjusted his glasses and began to read with perfect enunciation. Consolidated account statement of the San Gabriel Oil Trust. Sole holder. Mrs. Eleanor Shaw, widow of Montemayor. Liquid assets, accumulated as royalties from exploitation in the North Sea Basin during the current fiscal period. The solicitor paused dramatically and looked at the siblings over his spectacles. The figure amounts to £12 million, plus accumulated interest. The world stopped. Bethany had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling. She knew it was a lot of money, but that amount was abstract and unimaginable. Rupert went white as paper. His mouth opened and closed several times like a fish out of water. 12 million? He stammered. He put a hand to his chest, feeling a real tachycardia. But the wells were old. They said they were dry. They were reactivated 5 years ago with new fracking technology. Arthur explained with satisfaction. Your mother received the notices, but since you already had her isolated in the annex of the house, you never found out. She blocked the accounts to protect herself from this. Penelope let out a choked cry and looked at her mother with an expression that quickly shifted from horror to desperate, grotesque greed. "Mother," Penelope exclaimed, getting up and running towards her with open arms. "My beautiful mummy, I knew you were a genius." "Oh, thank God you're well. What a fright you gave us with that poverty prank." She tried to hug Eleanor, but the old woman raised her walking stick and placed it against her daughter's chest, stopping her dead. "Don't touch me," Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, but sharp as ice. 5 minutes ago I smelled like a cowshed. 5 minutes ago my hands disgusted you. I don't smell bad anymore, Penelope. Or does money have a perfume that covers up rottenness? Penelope recoiled, humiliated, her face burning. "Mum, please, we were stressed. We didn't know what we were saying. You know how Rupert is. He pressured me." "Shut up, Viper," Rupert shouted, jumping off the sofa. "Don't blame me." He turned to Eleanor, trying to recompose his businessman's posture, though sweat ran down his temples. "Mother, listen. This changes things. Obviously, the state asylum is no place for you. We'll cancel that. I'll take you to my house. I'll give you the master suite. We'll hire private nurses. Anything you want." "Your house?" Eleanor asked with irony. "That house where you forbade me from entering the main living room because my old shoes scratched the floor? That was a misunderstanding." He tried to excuse himself. "No," Eleanor cut him off. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was cruelty. And today here you threw coins on the floor. You told me I was worth what I had." Eleanor bent down with difficulty and picked up the £1 note that Rupert had tossed earlier. She held it up in the air, showing it as proof of the crime. "This note, Rupert, is the price of your inheritance." Rupert stood paralyzed. "What? What do you mean?" "Solicitor, read the final clause," Eleanor ordered. Arthur turned the pages until he reached the fresh document drafted the previous night. "Therefore, and in full possession of my mental faculties, certified by a forensic doctor on this very date," Arthur showed an attached medical certificate, blocking any attempt by Rupert to claim dementia. "I revoke any previous will and declare my children Rupert and Penelope entirely disinherited for reasons of grave ingratitude, abandonment, and proven psychological abuse." "You can't do that," Rupert roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "I'm your son. It's my right. I'll contest this. I'll drag you through every court." "Try it," Arthur challenged. "I have security recordings from this morning. I have Bethany's testimony. I have this note on the floor, and I have Mr. Snivel present here." Arthur looked at the corrupt notary, who I'm sure will testify in our favor so as not to lose his license for attempted fraud. "Won't you, colleague?" Snivel nodded frantically, gathering his things. Yes, of course, all legal. I'd better go. This is a family matter." The notary ran out, leaving the siblings alone in their shipwreck. "Then who?" Penelope asked, crying, but not from repentance, but from rage. "Who gets everything? The government? The church?" Eleanor walked to Bethany, who was still standing in the corner, a silent witness to the Greek tragedy. The old woman took the young widow's calloused, working hand and raised it high. "She," Eleanor announced, "Bethany Smith, and my granddaughter Lily." Rupert looked at Bethany with pure, undiluted, visceral hatred. "She?" he spat. "That commoner? You're going to leave my money to a servant you picked up from the street? She must have brainwashed you. She's an opportunist. She picked me up," Eleanor corrected with a voice like thunder. "When you threw me out like rubbish, she lifted me up. She shared her food when she had none. You, who have plenty, denied me a glass of water." Eleanor squeezed Bethany's hand. "Bethany is not a servant. She is the widow of your cousin John. She is family, and she has more nobility in her little fingernail than you in your entire body." Penelope collapsed to the floor, sobbing hysterically. "It's not fair. I have debts, Mum. I owe on my credit cards. They're going to take my car." "Then work," Eleanor told her, looking at her without pity. "You have 2 healthy hands. Learn to use them, like Bethany does. It's the best lesson I can give you before I die." Rupert, seeing that all was lost, tried one last card. Physical threat. He took a step towards his mother with clenched fists. "I won't allow this, you crazy old woman. Give me those papers!" But before he could get closer, Bethany stepped in front of him. She was no longer the frightened woman of yesterday. Now she was the lioness defending her pride. She grabbed a broom that was leaning against the wall and held it like a spear. "Back!" Bethany shouted, and her dark eyes shone with a fury that made Rupert recoil. Don't you dare touch her. This is my house, and you are not welcome. Get out, Eleanor declared, pointing to the open door where the midday sun shone relentlessly. Out of my sight. And take your coins. You'll need them. Rupert looked at his mother, then at Bethany, and finally at Mr. Arthur, who was already dialing a number on his mobile, probably that of the local constable. You'll regret this, Mother, Rupert hissed with venom in his voice. You'll die alone in this hole. Better alone than in bad company, Eleanor replied. And I'm not alone. I have my real family here. Rupert turned on his heel, kicked a chair in his path, and stormed out. Penelope got up, her mascara streaking, making her look like a sad clown, and ran after him, shouting accusations at her brother. The luxury car engines roared one last time, raising a cloud of dust that, this time, for Eleanor and Bethany, did not signify invasion, but cleansing. They were taking away the bad energy. They were taking away the greed. When the sound faded on the road, a deep, healing silence descended upon Hopewell Farm. Eleanor turned to Bethany. The adrenaline left her body, and the old woman swayed. Bethany dropped the broom and held her in a strong, warm embrace. It's over, Aunt. They're gone, Bethany whispered. Yes, daughter, they're gone. Eleanor leaned on the young woman's shoulder and wept, not for the money or for the victory, but for the grief of having lost her children in life. Now we can start living. Mr. Arthur discreetly wiped a tear from behind his glasses. Well, ladies, I think we have a mortgage to pay, and I think there's a bank that's going to get a big surprise this afternoon. Bethany looked at her aunt, then at John's photo on the altar. We did it, my love, she said to the heir. We saved the land. But the story didn't end there. With the money secured and the vultures expelled, there remained an unfinished mission, a mission Eleanor had kept in her heart for 50 years, and that now, with resources in hand, she could fulfill. Bethany, Eleanor said, pulling out of the embrace and wiping her tears with determination. Prepare the Land Rover. Now. Where are we going, Aunt? We're going to find my sister, Eleanor said. We're going to find John's mother, because money is useless if it doesn't heal the wounds of the past. Lily, Bethany called. Bring buttons. We're going to find your other grandmother. The journey into the past was about to begin, and what they would find in that hospice would change John's memory forever. The private ambulance, a white, modern vehicle equipped with the latest medical technology, devoured the motorway like an arrow. Behind it, Bethany drove her old Land Rover Defender, with Mr. Arthur as co-driver, while the dust of the Dales swirled furiously in their wake. Music. Inside the ambulance, Mrs. Eleanor held Lily's hand tightly. The girl looked out the window, mesmerized by the speed and flashing lights, but the old woman didn't see the landscape. Her eyes were fixed on the void, replaying 50 years of family history. Music. Is the new granny far away? Lily asked. She's near the border, my darling, where the map ends and oblivion begins. Music, Eleanor replied, her voice laden with thick melancholy. The journey lasted 4 interminable hours. The landscape changed from dry, cultivated fields to the brutal aridity of the border region, where the sun beat down mercilessly on cardboard houses and fading hope. Music. Finally, they arrived at a dusty village forgotten by God and government. Street. Jude's hospice was an old red brick building, surrounded by a high wall, topped with broken glass to deter thieves, though inside there was nothing to steal but tired souls. It was a charitable institution run by nuns who performed miracles with donations and faith. The ambulance stopped in the gravel yard. Music. Bethany jumped out of her Land Rover, her heart pounding in her throat. She helped Eleanor out. The old woman adjusted her shawl and straightened her back, walking towards the entrance. She was no longer the defeated woman from the roadside. She was a matriarch on a rescue mission. A young nun, with a worn but impeccably white habit, came out to greet them. Are you looking for Mrs. Rose? The sister asked in a soft voice. I've come for my sister, Eleanor said. The nun nodded, and in her eyes, there was a glimmer of compassion. She has been praying for years that someone would come. She said her family would come before the Lord called her. No one believed her until today. They guided them through long, silent corridors that smelled of bleach, old wax, and cheap medicine. Distant coughs and murmured prayers could be heard. It was the antechamber of death, but a dignified antechamber. They reached the last room down the corridor. The door was ajar. She's very weak, the nun warned in a whisper. Her heart barely has the strength to beat. Try not to upset her too much. Eleanor took a deep breath, crossed herself, and pushed the door open. The room was small, with a high window that let in an oblique ray of light where dust motes danced. On a narrow, iron bed lay a figure that seemed made of paper and bone. Bethany stifled a gasp. The woman in the bed was identical to Eleanor, but as if consumed from within. She had the same sharp profile, the same proud Shaw nose, but her skin was translucent, showing the blue map of her veins. Eleanor approached slowly, as one approaches a sacred altar. "Rose," she whispered. The figure in the bed stirred. Heavy eyelids slowly opened, and there were those eyes. John's same eyes, Eleanor's same eyes. "Eleanor." Rose's voice was a dry crackle like leaves rustled in autumn. "Is it you, or have I died already?" "It's me, Rosie. It's me, Eleanor." She collapsed onto the chair beside the bed and took her sister's skeletal hand. It was cold. "You came?" Rose tried to smile, but only managed a grimace of pain. "I knew you would come. I dreamt of you last night. I dreamt Mum was braiding our hair again." The two old women cried in silence, pressing their foreheads together. Decades of separation, of stupid pride, of lies and silences dissolved in that contact. Bethany remained in the doorway with Lily clutching her leg. She felt like an intruder in that intimate moment, but she knew she was needed. Rose turned her head with effort and saw the young woman in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed, trying to focus. "Who is she?" she asked weakly. She's a nurse." Eleanor dried her tears and looked at Bethany. She signaled for her to approach. "No, sister, she's not a nurse. She's the answer to all your prayers." Bethany approached with trembling steps, knelt beside the bed, coming level with the patient's eyes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Rose. My name is Bethany Smith." Rose looked at her with confusion. "And why are you here, child?" Bethany swallowed the lump in her throat. She looked at Eleanor for courage, and her aunt nodded. "Mrs. Rose, I was John's wife." The name dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond, creating shockwaves. Rose let go of Eleanor's hand and clutched her chest. Her breathing quickened dangerously. "John?" she stammered. "My baby?" "Yes, sister," Eleanor intervened quickly, stroking her arm to calm her. "Your son." Rose closed her eyes and began to shake her head repeatedly as tears streamed down. "No, it can't be. Dad told me he was stillborn. He told me the cord had choked him. He told me not to even name him, because he had no soul." The revelation was a physical blow to Bethany. Stillborn. That was the lie that had destroyed 2 lives. John had been told his mother was a loose woman who abandoned him at the hacienda gate to run off with a man, and she had been told her son was a corpse. "Damn him!" Eleanor cried, forgetting she was in a religious hospice. Her anger against her father, dead for years, revived with ferocity. "He lied to all of us. He gave the child away to some farmhands on the other estate to punish you, to erase your shame." Rose opened her eyes, and in them there was a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "He lived?" she asked in a faint voice. "My boy lived?" "He lived," Bethany assured, taking her mother-in-law's hand and kissing it with reverence. "And he was a good man, a hard-working, honest countryman. He had your smile, madam, and your eyes." "Where is he?" Rose tried to sit up, drawing strength from nowhere. "I want to see him. Take me to him. I have to tell him I never forgot him. I have to tell him I loved him every day of my life." Bethany lowered her head. Silence returned to the room, dense and cruel. Eleanor squeezed her sister's hand. "Rosie, John is waiting for us in heaven. He passed away 2 years ago." Rose slumped against the pillow. The moan that came from her throat was the sound of a heart breaking for the second time. "Dead?" she sobbed. "I found him only to know I lost him again. My God, why do you punish me like this?" "No, madam, it's not a punishment," Bethany said firmly, lifting her tear-stained face. "John lived happily. He loved me, and he loved this land. And even though he believed you had left him, he always kept this." Bethany reached into her bag and pulled out a small, old, yellowed, embroidered blanket that John kept as his most precious treasure. It was the only thing he had from his origins. Rose touched the fabric with trembling fingers. She recognized her own embroidery, the blue flowers she had sewn while waiting for that forbidden baby. "He kept it," she whispered. "And he left something else," Bethany said. She turned and held out her hand towards the door. "Lily, come." The girl, frightened but brave, approached, clutching her rabbit. "Mrs. Rose," Bethany said, her voice filled with pride. "I introduce you to Lily Maria, your granddaughter." Rose looked at the girl, saw the dark curls, the firm chin, the curious gaze. It was like seeing herself in a mirror of time. It was seeing John reborn. "Come closer, my dear," the old woman pleaded. extending her skeletal arms. Lily looked at her mum, and seeing Bethany smile through tears, she approached the bed. Rose touched the girl's little face, tracing her features with fingers that trembled with adoration. "You're beautiful," Rose whispered. "You have my John's face." "Hello, new granny," Lily said. "Mummy says you were lost, but we found you now." Rose burst into tears, but this time it was not tears of death, but of resurrection. She hugged the girl with what little strength she had left, burying her face in her granddaughter's hair. "Thank you, my God," she repeated. "Thank you for letting me see this." Eleanor stood up, drying her tears with determination. "Right, there have been enough tears for today." She turned to the nun, who was watching from the door, moved. "Sister, prepare the discharge papers. We're taking her with us." The nun blinked, surprised. "But madam, she requires palliative care, oxygen, strong medicines. I don't think she'll tolerate the journey in a normal car." "Don't worry about that, mister." Arthur intervened, appearing behind the nun. "We have an intensive care ambulance waiting outside, and we'll hire private nurses 24 hours a day." "Where are you taking me?" Rose asked, weak, but with a spark of new life in her eyes. "Home, sister," Eleanor said, taking her hand. "To Hopewell Farm, to the land your son worked. You're going to sleep on Egyptian cotton sheets. You're going to eat chicken broth made by Bethany, and you're going to watch your granddaughter grow up." "But I don't have money," Rose murmured, the old habit of poverty speaking for her. "I do," Eleanor said, and smiled. "I have enough for both of us. I recovered what Dad stole from us, Rosie, and we're going to spend it on living like queens the days we have left." Paramedics entered with a soft stretcher. They lifted Rose as if she were a feather. As they left the hospice, the afternoon sun bathed the courtyard. Rose closed her eyes and felt the warmth on her face. For the first time in 50 years, she was not an orphan, nor a mother without a child, nor a vagrant. She was a grandmother. She was a sister. She was a shore. Bethany walked beside the stretcher, holding her mother-in-law's hand. "I'm going to tell you everything about him, madam. I'm going to tell you how he laughed, how he sang on the tractor. John will live again in your ears." "That's all I want, daughter," Rose replied. "Only that." The caravan of vehicles left the border village, leaving oblivion behind. The ambulance went slowly, carefully, carrying the most valuable cargo of all, forgiveness and memory. In the sky, the first stars began to appear, and Bethany would swear that one of them shone brighter than the others, winking at her from the immensity, just as John used to do. The return to Hopewell Farm was not just an arrival, it was a triumphant procession of the spirit. The ambulance crossed the wooden gate that Bethany had already repaired that same morning, just as the sun painted the horizon a deep, almost sacred violet. The dogs barked, but this time it was not a warning of strangers, but a chorus of welcome. As the stretcher was lowered, the fresh night air hit Rose's face, bringing with it the scent of damp earth, for Bethany had left the sprinklers on to receive her. "Welcome home, Mother Rose," Bethany whispered in the old woman's ear as the paramedics maneuvered delicately towards the house. "Is this it?" Rose asked, her eyes wide, trying to absorb every detail in the dimness. "He lived here. He loved here. And he remains here in every tree and every stone," Eleanor replied, walking beside the stretcher like an eternal guardian. They settled Rose in the main bedroom. Bethany had insisted on giving up her own room, the largest and best ventilated. In a few hours, she had transformed it. 1000 thread count, Egyptian cotton sheets that Eleanor had ordered from the city, an orthopedic mattress that felt like a cloud, and on the bedside table, a vase with fresh sunflowers and John's photo. When Rose saw the photo from her bed, she let out a sigh that seemed to empty her lungs of 50 years of anguish. "Hello, my boy," she murmured, reaching out to touch the glass. "I'm here now. Your mother is here." The following days were a medicine no doctor could prescribe. The presence of the three women under the same roof created a new, vibrant, healing energy. They were the trinity of resilience: Eleanor, the strength and justice; Rose, the memory and love; and Bethany, the present and action. The inheritance money began to flow, not like a raging river, but like a precise and vital irrigation channel. Bethany, advised by Eleanor, did not buy sports cars or jewelry. The first thing she did was pay the village farm hands triple the usual wage to help harvest the crops and repair the barns. "Money must sweat to be worthy," Eleanor would say, sitting on the porch supervising the work with her walking stick in hand like a royal scepter. The sound of the farm changed. It was no longer the silence of worry. Now, the powerful roar of a new, gleaming green tractor could be heard, which Bethany drove with pride, tilling the hard earth as if it were butter. The hammering of carpenters fixing the roof could be heard, and the rhythmic drip of a state-of-the-art drip irrigation system that miraculously made the fields green again. But the most beautiful change occurred inside the house. Every afternoon, at tea time, a sacred ritual was celebrated. Rose, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, would ask for her medicine. "Tell me another, daughter. Tell me about the time the bull escaped," she would ask anxiously. And Bethany, while shelling corn or mending clothes, would begin to weave John's story. She told her how he would laugh heartily when it rained, how he would sing to Lily when she was in the womb, how his big hands were soft enough to heal an injured animal. He was stubborn as a mule, though, Bethany would laugh, wiping a nostalgic tear. Once he got an idea in his head, not even God himself could change it. "Just like his grandfather," Rose would exclaim, laughing for the first time with a clear laugh, free of phlegm or pain. "He has the Shaw character." Eleanor, knitting in the rocking chair nearby, would nod. "Blood is an underground river, sister. It never stops flowing even if you don't see it." Those afternoon chats brought color back to Rose's cheeks. Although her body remained fragile, her spirit was strengthened with each anecdote, filling the void in her memory with Bethany's borrowed memories. John ceased to be a ghost to become a living presence in the room. Lily, the little one, was the bridge between past and future. She would run from Aunt Eleanor's lap to Grandma Rose's chair, bringing them flowers, drawings, or simply sticky sweet kisses. "I have two grandmas," she would boast to the dogs. "One is the boss, and the other is the queen." However, not everything was peace. The outside world tried to seep through the cracks. One morning, Mr. Arthur arrived with a frown and a folder under his arm. "Bad news from the city," he said, accepting the tea Bethany offered him. "My children?" Eleanor asked, without stopping knitting, though her needles paused for a second. "They're desperate. They've tried to contest the will 3 times. No judge will listen to them. The evidence of their abandonment is too overwhelming." But what? "Rupert is technically bankrupt. His creditors have seized his accounts. And Penelope is selling her designer clothes online to keep the lights on." Bethany felt a pang of pity. We should help them, Aunt, a little." Eleanor struck the floor with her walking stick. "No," her voice resonated with the authority of thunder. "If we help them now, we steal the lesson from them. They have to learn what hunger is, Bethany. They have to learn what it's like to be looked down upon. It's the only way they might someday save their souls. Pain is the chisel that carves conscience." Rose, from her chair, placed her hand on her sister's. "You're tough, Eleanor. I'm just Rosie. I was soft for 40 years and created monsters. Now I have to be tough to see if there's any human being left beneath the monster's skin." The matter was settled. At Hopewell Farm, they didn't talk about the ungrateful. They talked about the next courgette harvest, which promised to be the best in a decade, and about the Thanksgiving feast Bethany wanted to organize. "It'll be the first time we're all complete," Bethany said, looking at the 2 old women whom fate had given her. "I want to invite everyone, the neighbors who lent us flour when we had none, the village doctor, Mr. Arthur." "Invite whoever you want, daughter," Eleanor said, smiling. "We have plenty of tables and heart for everyone." Life flourished. Cracks in the walls were mended with cement and gold. Pain was diluted in cups of hot chocolate. And, at the center of it all, Bethany, the farmer, who once thought she had lost everything, realized she was the richest woman in the world, not because of the millions in the bank, but because every night, when she turned off the light, she heard the quiet breathing of 3 generations, sleeping under a secure roof. But capricious fate, like the Yorkshire wind, had reserved one last visit, one that would not come with lawyers or threats, but with bowed heads and broken pride. Autumn arrived in the dales not with falling leaves, but with a change in the light that turned golden and soft, and a fresh wind that forced out woolen shawls. At Hopewell Farm, however, the climate was of eternal spring. It was the day of the great feast. Bethany had decided to call it a celebration. It wasn't just an American Thanksgiving. It was an offering of gratitude to the land and to God in the style of her hometown's patron saint festivals. From 4 inches the morning, the kitchen was the pulsating heart of the house. The aroma was a complex and delicious symphony. The sweet smell of brown sugar melting for the herbal tea, the smoky spice of rich lamb stew bubbling in giant earthenware pots, and the unmistakable perfume of the turkey roasting slowly in the outdoor wood-fired oven. "Slower with the whisk. Bethany, you'll make the chocolate dizzy," Rose instructed from her wheelchair, strategically placed so as not to miss any detail. Although her hands no longer had the strength to cook, her tongue remained that of a culinary general. And add another pinch of cinnamon. John liked it with lots of cinnamon. Yes, Mother Rose, as you command. Bethany laughed, her face smudged with flour and her eyes shining with happiness. Eleanor, for her part, was in charge of the decorations. She had arranged long tables in the courtyard under the shade of the huge oak that had survived the drought. There were no silk tablecloths or fine china. There were cheerful, simple red and white checkered tablecloths and glazed earthenware plates. The centerpieces were not imported orchids, but baskets filled with the courgettes and corn the farm's land had produced that year. No false luxuries, Eleanor had decreed. I want this table to smell of hard work. At midday, the guests began to arrive. They were not the crème de la crème of society, those who had flattered Eleanor when she had mansions and ignored her when she disappeared. They were the salt of the earth. Mr. Davies, the postman, arrived with his wife. The farmhands who had helped with the harvest arrived in their neatly ironed Sunday shirts and hats in hand. Mrs. Smith, the owner of the village shop who had given Bethany credit when she didn't have a penny, arrived. And of course, Mr. Arthur arrived in his usual suit and a bottle of aged whiskey under his arm. "Welcome," Bethany greeted at the entrance, hugging everyone as if they were blood family. The music of a local folk trio filled the air, mingling with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Lily ran among the tables, playing hide and seek with the workers' children in the new dress her two grandmothers had sewn for her by hand. When everyone was seated and the food served, Eleanor stood at the head of the main table. She gently tapped her glass with a fork. Silence slowly became respectful and expectant. "Friends, neighbors, family," Eleanor began. Her voice, amplified by the silence of the countryside, sounded clear and strong. "A few months ago, I was a shadow walking by the roadside, waiting for death. I was hungry, I was thirsty, and worst of all, my soul was frozen." She looked at Bethany, who was sitting to her right, holding Rose's hand. "But God works in mysterious ways. He put me in the path of this woman." She pointed to Bethany, who saw not my rags, but my humanity. "And thanks to her, today I not only recovered my life, but I recovered my sister." Rose raised her glass with a trembling hand, her eyes filled with grateful tears. "I toast, not to the money that saved our roof," Eleanor continued, "but to the love that saved our lives." "Cheers, cheers," echoed the chorus of voices. The party erupted in joy. The lamb stew was perfect. The whiskey burned pleasantly in the throat, and stories flew from table to table. It was the image of fullness. But then the sound of a crude, noisy engine broke the harmony of the guitars. An old, faded car with a broken exhaust pipe stopped at the farm entrance, right in front of the open gate. The engine coughed one last time and died with a choked sound. The music stopped, the laughter faded, all eyes turned towards the entrance. The driver's door opened with a screech. A man got out. He wore a crumpled shirt, trousers that were too big, and worn-out shoes. He had several days' beard growth and deep dark circles under his eyes. It was Rupert, but not the arrogant Rupert of Italian suits. It was a broken Rupert. From the other side, Penelope got out, without makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and a simple dress that looked bought from a second-hand market. She looked 10 years older. They walked towards the party with hesitant steps, hunched over like dogs that know they've done something wrong and fear the rolled-up newspaper. Bethany instinctively stood up, protecting Lily. Eleanor remained seated, but her face turned to stone. Rose squeezed Bethany's hand. The siblings stopped a few meters from the tables, separated from the celebration by an invisible abyss of shame. "Mother," Rupert said. His voice was a pathetic croak. Eleanor did not move. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited. We just wanted to congratulate you," Penelope stammered, wringing her hands. "And see how you were." "I'm excellent, as you can see," Eleanor replied coldly. "Better than ever. Is that all?" Rupert took a desperate step forward. "Mother, please. We're in a bad way. A very bad way. They foreclosed on my house. Penelope lives in a loft room. We have nothing." The guests murmured. Poetic justice was unfolding before their eyes. Those who once looked down on others now looked up from the mud. "You have your health," Eleanor said, using the same words they had said to her. "You have 2 hands. Work." "We tried," Rupert whimpered, "but no one will hire me. My reputation is ruined." "Mother, we're hungry. Really, we haven't eaten properly in 2 days." The mention of hunger made Bethany's heart, always soft, lurch. She looked at the abundance of food on the tables. "Aunt," Bethany whispered, "there's so much food. 1 plate won't make us poor." Eleanor looked at Bethany. then at her children. She remembered the day she asked for water and was denied. She remembered the £1 note on the floor. She slowly stood up, leaning on her walking stick. She walked until she stood in front of them. "You're hungry?" Eleanor repeated. "Yes, Mum, very," Penelope said, crying. Eleanor took a plate from the nearest table, put a generous helping of turkey, stew, and rice on it. The smell made Rupert's stomach rumble audibly. Eleanor held the plate out in front of them. The siblings reached out their hands eagerly, but Eleanor did not give it to them. She turned and called one of the farm dogs, Rover. "Rover, come here." She placed the plate on the ground. The dog wagged its tail and began to eat with relish. Rupert and Penelope let out a cry of indignation and horror. "Mother, what are you doing?" Penelope shrieked. "That's for us." "No," Eleanor said, looking at them with eyes of steel. "When I was hungry, you treated me worse than a dog. You threw coins on the floor. You denied me water." She approached Rupert, invading his space, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "Hunger is a great teacher, my children. You are just beginning the first lesson. If I feed you today, I interrupt your learning." "You're a monster!" Rupert shouted, his face red with humiliation and rage. "No, Rupert, I am your mother, and for the first time in my life, I am truly educating you. Go and find work, go and wash dishes, sweep streets, carry boxes like decent people do. Earn your bread. And when you know what a humble sandwich earned with sweat costs, then, and only then, perhaps you can knock on this door again." She pointed to the exit with her walking stick. "Now, get out. You're ruining my party." Rupert looked at the plate on the ground, looked at the guests who watched him with a mixture of pity and scorn, and understood that he was defeated. No manipulation was possible. The source had dried up. He grabbed Penelope by the arm, who was crying hysterically, and dragged her back to the old car. The engine coughed, started with difficulty, and they drove away, raising a cloud of gray, sad, definitive dust. Bethany approached Eleanor, who was still looking at the empty road, trembling slightly. That was too harsh, Aunt." Eleanor turned. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was high. "It was necessary, Bethany. Forgiveness is God's, but the lesson is mine. If they ever return, let them return as human beings, not as parasites." She returned to the table, took her glass, and smiled at the guests, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let the music play. Nothing happened here. We just took out the rubbish." The mariachi music started again, a lively and vibrant folk tune. The party continued until the stars came out, but everyone knew that something profound had changed. Hopewell Farm was not just a place of cultivation. It was a moral fortress where dignity was not negotiated, neither for hunger nor for millions. Rose, from her chair, squeezed her sister's hand. "You did well, Eleanor. You did well." And under the infinite Yorkshire sky, 3 women toasted to the roots that sustained them and to the rotten branches they had had the courage to cut. The village cemetery of Pickering was not a gloomy place. Situated on a gentle hill under the shade of ancient oaks, it seemed more a garden of rest than a place of finality. The morning after the party, when the sun was just beginning to warm the dew on the grass, Bethany's Land Rover stopped in front of the wrought iron gate. They got out in silence. Bethany took the wheelchair from the boot, while Eleanor held an immense bouquet of sunflowers, so bright they looked like pieces of the sun itself. They helped Rose get out. The old woman was pale, fatigued by the emotions of the previous day, but her eyes had a feverish sparkle of anticipation. "Come on, Mother Rose," Bethany said, pushing the chair along the gravel path. "He's here, under his favorite tree." They arrived at a simple limestone gravestone. There was no black marble or weeping angels, just a hand-carved cross and an inscription, "John Smith. He loved the land and his own. Died 2023. Bethany braked the chair. The silence of the countryside, broken only by the song of a blackbird, enveloped the 3 women. Rose leaned forward. With trembling hands, she touched the cold stone. Her fingers traced the letters of her son's name, as if by touching them she could touch his face. "Hello, my boy," Rose whispered. Her voice broke, releasing a sob that came from the depths of her empty womb. Forgive me for taking so long. They told me you were gone. They lied to me, son. They lied." Bethany knelt beside her, placing a hand on her mother-in-law's shoulder. "He never hated you, madam. He always looked at the horizon and said, 'Someday I'll know where I come from.' Now he knows. You are here." Eleanor approached and placed the sunflowers on the damp earth. "We're all here now, nephew," Eleanor said, looking at the grave with respect. "Your mother, your wife, your daughter, And your old aunt who arrived late to the party. But arrived. Rest, John. They are safe now. I will look after them. Lily, who had been quiet, hugging her rabbit, approached the gravestone, took a smooth, white stone she had found by the river from her pocket, and placed it next to the flowers. So you can play in heaven, Daddy. Rose looked at her granddaughter, then at Bethany, and finally at her sister. She smiled through tears, a smile of absolute peace. It's done, she said. The circle is closed. My chest no longer hurts, sister. The emptiness is filled. Time at Hopewell Farm began to be measured not in hours, but in harvests. 3 years passed. 3 years, where the earth, grateful for the care and water, returned the kindness multiplied 1,000-fold. The farm became the main producer in the region, but also something more, a refuge. Bethany, with Eleanor's financial support, opened a small community kitchen in the old barn. Every day, seasonal farmhands and forgotten elderly found a hot meal and a kind word there. There were no questions, only service. Wealth is not for building walls, but for building longer tables, Eleanor would repeat, who, despite her 80s, still kept the business accounts with sharp lucidity. One winter afternoon, Mr. Davies, the postman, brought a different letter. It wasn't from the bank or suppliers, it came from the city, written on cheap paper. Eleanor opened it on the porch. It was from Rupert. Mother, I work in a warehouse. It's hard. My back aches every day and I earn minimum wage. Penelope is working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. We live in a small flat. I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that the turkey that night smelled very good and that you were right. Hunger teaches. Perhaps someday I will be worthy to sit at your table. Until then, take care. Eleanor folded the letter and looked at the horizon. There was no total forgiveness, but there was hope. The lesson had worked. Her children were surviving, becoming human beings through effort. Bad news, Aunt? Bethany asked, coming out with a tray of tea. No, daughter, just news, Eleanor replied, putting the letter in her pocket. The world is ordering itself, but the law of life is inexorable. Rose, whose health had been a miracle sustained by love, began to fade like a candle at the end of its wick. There was no agony or cold hospitals. One spring afternoon, as she sat in her wheelchair, watching Lily chase butterflies, Rose called her sister. Eleanor, she said softly. I'm here, Rosie. Look how beautiful the sky is today. It looks like the dress Mum made us for our first communion. Yes, sister, it's beautiful. I'm sleepy, Eleanor. I think John is calling me for supper. Eleanor took her hand. She knew it was time. She didn't cry. She didn't want the last thing her sister saw to be sadness. Go, Rosie, go peacefully. Give him a kiss from me. I'll catch up with you later. Rose closed her eyes with a smile on her lips, lulled by the farm wind and her granddaughter's distant laughter. She passed away in peace, surrounded by the love that had been stolen from her for decades, and that she had recovered in the end. The village funeral was crowded, but simple. They buried her next to John, mother and son reunited in the earth as they were in heaven. Months later, at sunset, Bethany and Eleanor sat on the porch. Lily, who had already shot up, was reading a book on the steps. The setting sun bathed the farm in liquid gold. Everything the eye could see was green and prosperous. Aunt, Bethany said, breaking the comfortable silence. Sometimes I think, what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day on the road? Eleanor swayed gently in her chair. You would have remained poor in money, and I would have died rich in coins, but a beggar for love. She looked at Bethany with intensity. That day, Bethany, you didn't save me. Music, we saved each other. You passed the test that my children failed, the test of seeing God in the face of the needy. Do you think John knew? Bethany asked, looking at the sky. Do you think he brought us together? Music, I have no doubt, daughter. Miracles are not lightning bolts from the sky. Miracles are people who decide to be good when no one is watching them. Eleanor pointed to the field, the house, the reading child. This is your inheritance, Bethany, not the millions in the bank. That's just paper. Your inheritance is this, the certainty that you did the right thing, the footprints you leave on the souls of others. Music, Bethany smiled, and for the first time in years, she felt completely free of fear. Music, the future could bring droughts or storms, but it no longer mattered. They had strong roots. Music. Thank you, Aunt Eleanor, she said, taking her wrinkled hand. Thank you, niece. Thank you for the water. Music. The sun finished setting, giving way to an infinite blanket of stars over Yorkshire. At Hopewell Farm, the lights came on, warm and inviting, signaling to the world that a family lived there who had turned pain into love and poverty, music into the greatest of riches. If this story touched your heart, and you believe that everyone reaps what they sow, please support us with a like and music. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our narrations. We want to read from you. Would you have forgiven the children? Or would you have done the same as Mrs. Eleanor? Write the word justice in the comments to let us know you made it to the end. May God bless your home, and until the next story.